Constitution protects our society and empowers us to govern. The protea leaves are us, the people, who freely elect our voices in Parliament. The drum calls the people of Parliament, through whom we govern together. And the sun is our country, healing our past, improving our lives, and energizing our potential. Together, our Constitution, our people, our Parliament, and our country are building our great South African nation. Parliament TV, Channel 408 or DSTV.
Good afternoon and welcome to Parliament TV. My name is Sibulelo Mbulane and I am, of course, joined by my colleague, Thembinkosi Ngoma, and we're coming to you live from Parliament TV studios in Cape Town. Today, the new Minister of Finance will be giving his maiden speech as the new Minister of Finance when he delivers the medium-term budget policy statement. Now, this is quite important because the new minister, as we know, this will be the very first time that he actually engages, not only that he speaks to the nation, but he will be addressing the National Assembly, obviously on the issues of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is at the top of the agenda, which the country is still trying to, move forward out of. But that is one of the key issues that we can expect, but everybody's waiting with great anticipation.
Definitely, people are waiting with great anticipation. Firstly, this is his maiden speech. So people are waiting to hear what he has to say to the Parliament and to the country. Good afternoon, viewers, and welcome to Parliament's coverage of the medium-term budget policy statement. The program of Parliament is back in full swing after a short break to prepare for local government elections. The program started in Ernst this week with the Auditor General of South Africa briefing committees of Parliament on the audit outcomes of different departments and the state-owned entities reporting to them. The committees are also dealing with the 2020-2021 annual reports and financial statements of various departments. So, as you would have noticed that from the beginning of this week when Parliament resumes, Parliament has been hard at work. We've had a number of committees sitting, considering these annual reports and financial statements. We have had some shocking news, in particular from those entities that have already appeared before the committees of Parliament. So it's quite a hectic week for Parliament ahead.
Indeed, and also just in terms of oversight and accountability, this gives Parliament the opportunity to scrutinize those reports and also to go back to be able to assess whether departments have actually delivered on all of the commitments that were made earlier in the year during the State of the Nation address, when the President announced the program of action, and of course also the more detail we receive through the budget vote process. Now, Parliament's fourth term program is packed with various important activities and engagements with presiding officers and members of Parliament involved in international programs across various parts of the continent. Some of the key activities for this week alone include the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association Africa Region Conference, the SADC PF meeting, the fourth ordinary session of the fifth Parliament of the Pan-African Parliament, and then later in this month, there is going to be the 143rd IPU Assembly. Now that also, as you know, Thembinkosi, is one of Parliament's key policy priorities, is to ensure that it participates in global activities or global conversations where issues of global importance are discussed. And as we know, at the top of the agenda at the moment is the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, not only on South Africa's economy, but on the global community at large. So this is one of the issues that we know is a topical issue that will be discussed on those international fora platforms alongside many other issues.
And this is indeed, it's just to also indicate, this also indicates that this pandemic is not a one country, one nation pandemic. Absolutely. It cuts across, it's a global pandemic. And the only way that we can defeat it is if we get together and sit together and discuss, find ways on how best to deal with the pandemic, ways that will not impact negatively on our citizens, because Absolutely. We also need to be mindful of that we have citizens that we need to take care
Absolutely.
of. But back to this afternoon, though, our focus is on the medium-term budget policy statement, as Mr. Enoch Godongwana will deliver his maiden speech as Minister of Finance. Please stay tuned.
Following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better. Parliament TV, Channel 408 on DSTV. Following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better.
On Thursday, the 11th of November, the Minister of Finance, Mr. Enoch Godongwana, will deliver his maiden medium-term budget policy statement to the National Assembly. The MTBPS updates revenue, spending, and borrowing projections for the coming year and projects how the country's limited resources should be used to sustain programs necessary to keep the South African democratic state on course. This includes a revised fiscal framework and a proposed fiscal framework for the next 3 years, an explanation of the projections and assumptions of the fiscal framework, a review of actual spending of the current financial year, and proposes substantial adjustments to conditional grant allocations to provinces and local government, and a 3-year national government spending priorities and proposed division of revenue. The MTBPS makes it possible for Parliament and the public to interact with government's budget plans several months ahead of the actual budget in February next year. We have your interest at heart. Tune in live across Parliament's platforms for the MTBPS 2021 at 2 p.m. on 11 November 2021. Our hashtag is #MTBPS 2021. For more information, visit our website at www.parliament.gov.za. Parliament, following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better.
Following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better.
The Portfolio Committee on Social Development has initiated a nationwide public participation process on the Children's Amendment Bill. The objectives of the bill are to amend the Children's Act of 2005 so as to amend and insert certain definitions, to provide for children's rights to privacy and protection of information, to further provide for the rights of unmarried fathers, to extend the Children's Court's jurisdiction, to further provide for funding of early childhood development programs, to provide for the designation and functions for a registrar of the National Child Protection Register, to further provide for the care of abandoned or orphaned children and additional matters that may be regulated, to further provide for rules relating to care and protection proceedings, to further provide for medical testing of children in need of care and protection or adoption, to provide for additional matters relating to children in alternative care, to further provide for matters relating to adoption and inter-country adoption, to further provide for the hearing of child abduction matters, to further provide for matters relating to surrogate motherhood, and to provide for matters connected therewith. The committee will be in the Eastern Cape from 9 to 13 November 2021 in the following areas. OR Tambo District in Mtata on Tuesday 9 November, Chris Hani District in Queenstown on Thursday 11 November, Buffalo City District in East London on Friday 12 November, Nelson Mandela Metro in Gqeberha on Saturday 13 November. Watch the public hearing on the Children's Amendment Bill in the Nelson Mandela Metro in Gqeberha on Saturday 13 November 2021, live across Parliament's platforms from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. For more information, visit Parliament's website on www.parliament.gov.za. Parliament, following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us, you're still watching Parliament TV on DSTV, channel 408. And we are, of course, building up to the Minister's all-important medium-term budget policy statement, which he will be delivering at 40. Tim Nkosi, just by way of introducing this very important conversation, we know that the country is still dealing with the impact, the far-reaching impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, not only on the economy. We know that our economy currently has been shrinking gradually since last year. And we know before the pandemic hit, we had already found ourselves in a technical recession. Yes. And the impact thus far, we know one of the key things is that many people have lost their jobs and their livelihoods. So unemployment is rising, poverty is rising as well. What are your thoughts in relation to what we can expect the Minister to talk to this afternoon?
You know, Sebulelo, it is his maiden speech. We haven't really heard from him before. Like if it was former Minister Mboweni, we would have our own projections of what to expect from him. But what we can hope for is that he will take all those things that you have just mentioned into consideration. We can never run away that the country is faced with this COVID-19 pandemic. We cannot run away from the fact that the unemployment rate is quite high, especially amongst young people who are supposed to be the key drivers.
And don't forget the women.
But exactly, the young people and the women, people who are supposed to be the key drivers of our economy. Absolutely. So if you are sitting with such a high number of unemployment amongst young people, as if I were to be in his shoes, I would worry a bit. But of course, as we had said, our people are hungry. That unemployment resulted to people staying at home. People are unemployed. So we're hoping that Minister Godongwana will, in his maiden speech, make a huge impact that will not only seek to assist our society, but also the global community in terms of markets.
Absolutely. Now, if you also reflect on what happened earlier in the year, in July, those unrests, the social unrest that took place in the KwaZulu-Natal as well as Gauteng, and many of that was actually attributed to people being living in really dire conditions, people who are desperate, who don't necessarily have the finances or the resources to look after themselves. So the current state of the economy has had a far-reaching impact on ordinary South Africans in particular. So there's a lot over and above the economy. There's also the social aspect of it. There's an expectation that the minister should also be putting some kind of social relief measures in place to make sure that we cushion the poor, those who actually can't even afford to buy basic things such as bread and milk and sugar and so forth. So that obviously there's an expectation. There's also a talk about possibly a possible basic income grant, but there have been a number of issues that have been raised about whether it's feasible and whether we can afford it as a country, given the fact that we are already sitting with a budget deficit, given the fact that tax revenues have been reduced due to the fact that so many people have lost their jobs. So the minister has got his work cut out for him. And I must say that, yes, indeed, many of us are waiting in great anticipation to hear what the minister has to say.
And this process of the medium-term budget policy statement also opens up to Parliament and the members of the public to scrutinize government's budget through committee oversight works. So to enable them to participate in these engagements so that they can measure the effectiveness and the efficiency of the use of the available resources. So yesterday, I visited a post office. I had to collect a parcel at the post office in my area. And it was shocking to see the long queue outside that post office, which stretched to close to 1 kilometer for people who were waiting to access the post office so that they can have access to their 350 rands grants. And when I was inside, I saw that money being paid to our communities. Yes, it's not much, but with the hope that they can at least try and survive or make better use of those 350 that they get, especially looking at our our financial state.
You know, Thembinkosi, that it's such an important point that you're making about just what a dire state our communities, many of our poor communities, are finding themselves in, which makes today's medium-term budget policy statement so important, because there's great expectation about what kind of relief measures the government will be putting in place to ensure that there's millions of people out there who often have to go to bed without a meal to eat. And of course, we know that those who had worked before, now those who have lost their work, they don't have work anymore, so that income is gone. So obviously we know, as a democratic state, government has a responsibility to look after its people while it works on matters of economic recovery. There is also an obligation from the state to ensure that it brings, that it puts in place all the necessary measures to make sure that people don't languish in poverty and in hunger.
And so I think the other thing that is very important, especially for the citizens, is that they need to use this opportunity. Once the minister tables this MTBPS this afternoon, this will then open a rigorous consultative process, which will also include quite a lot of public participation. We do have guests coming in later in the show that will explain to us how citizens can get to be part of this medium-term budget policy statement, which is preparing for the budget that will be delivered by the minister in February.
Indeed, Thembinkosi, for those who want to join the conversation, we are, of course, on all social media platforms. You can join us on hashtag MTBPS 2021. Now, in February of every year, the President of the Republic lays out government's program of action for the year ahead. Now, 2 weeks later, after the President has delivered his speech, the Minister of Finance then proceeds to share an overarching view on how government's program of action will be financed. Now, today, the Minister of Finance will deliver the medium-term budget policy statement to the National Assembly in support of the deliverables and commitments that have been made by the President in his State of the Nation address. The MTBPS also updates the revenue, spending and borrowing projections for the coming year and shows how the country's limited resources should be utilized in order to sustain the important programs that are necessary to keep South Africa's democratic state on course. Now, this also includes a revised fiscal framework and a proposed fiscal framework for the next 3 years. An explanation of the projections and assumptions of the fiscal framework is also provided. A review of actual spending of the current financial year is also provided, and it proposes a substantial adjustment to conditional grants allocations to provinces and local government, which is very important, while further also outlining a 3-year national government spending priorities and proposed division of revenue bill, which is very, very important, because ultimately this is about setting the tone in the agenda, the policy agenda for the next 3 years in order to move the country forward. So as we spoke earlier about how everybody's waiting with great anticipation to hear what the minister will be saying, it really is about saying, Minister, what are the solutions that the executive is putting on the table? And of course, there was a consultative process that took place with Parliament as well. Obviously, there was a public participation process as well. But of course, we're still waiting with great anticipation until 1400 hours this afternoon.
And we're waiting with great anticipation to hear of those solutions coming from the minister in his maiden speech. And for those who are watching this broadcast, who are watching the live broadcast, build up to the medium-term budget policy statement that will be delivered by Mr. Enoch Gondwana. It's his maiden speech, so we wait to hear. Today, we are not alone. We have few guests who will help us understand MTBPS. Our first guest is the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Auditor General, Mr. Sakumzi Somyo. This committee is one of the committees that cuts across all departments, as Auditor General oversees all these departments and state-owned entities. But let's then watch this clip on the role of the Auditor General of South Africa.
Following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better. Parliament TV, Channel 408 on DSTV. up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better.
On Thursday, the 11th of November, the Minister of Finance, Mr. Enoch Godongwana, will deliver his maiden medium-term budget policy statement to the National Assembly. The MTBPS updates revenue, spending, and borrowing projections for the coming year and projects how the country's limited resources should be used to sustain programs necessary to keep the South African democratic state on course. This includes a revised fiscal framework and a proposed fiscal framework for the next 3 years, an explanation of the projections and assumptions of the fiscal framework, a review of actual spending of the current financial year, and proposes substantial adjustments to conditional grant allocations to provinces and local government, and a 3-year national government spending priorities and proposed division of revenue. The MTBPS makes it possible for Parliament and the public to interact with government's budget plans several months ahead of the actual budget in February next year. We have your interest at heart. Tune in live across Parliament's platforms for the MTBPS 2021 at 2 p.m. on 11 November 2021. Our hashtag is #MTBPS 2021. For more information, visit our website at www.parliament.gov.za. Parliament, following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better.
Following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better. Following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better.
So the Office of the AG is essentially the nation's auditor. We are there to check whether the books of government are being maintained appropriately and whether the funds that are collected by government are indeed being used for the purpose that government has set. If you think about the idea that taxpayers pay their taxes across into government, and they entrust government to use those funds towards improving the lives of citizens through different investments right across society. And our job is to check whether or not the funds are being deployed in a way that's consistent with the promise made to citizens. So in simple terms, if the Minister of Finance confirms in his budget speech at the beginning of February that particular monies will be allocated to a particular project, let's say that eventually you can see it trickle down and you know that there's going to be a road that's built to make improvements into the lived conditions of a particular community. Our job is to check whether or not the course of implementing that project has gone well, whether that money that was set aside has gone to that purpose, whether the process of actually getting the road built is one where citizens have gotten value for money, in that we've paid the right price, and whether the books of accounting actually demonstrate that that money has been allocated to that particular purpose. And once we've done that, we share that report with the government officials that are charged with managing taxpayer funds or public funds. We also share those reports with the members of the executive, a minister, an MEC, as well as councils, so mayor, as well as the councils in the municipal space. And then we also share those reports with Parliament. Parliament would use those reports to hold public officials to account. So if somebody has spent money and they've not done so in a way that's consistent with expectations, Parliament can hold them to account based on our report. And we also tell citizens how their money, so public funds, have been spent. Now, all this is important because the money that is being deployed by government towards particular purposes is there to serve the interests of citizens. And our job is to ensure that that happens and be able to tell citizens whether that has happened, so that citizens can have some trust in the notion that public funds are being spent for their benefit. So it's really about building trust between citizens on the one hand and public officials on the other hand, and with Parliament as a key player in that value chain.
Following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work.
During the State of the Nation address, the President outlines government's priorities and objectives, and the Minister of Finance allocates funding for these programs, while the Auditor General comes in not only to monitor government spending, but to examine financial statements and transactions to ensure that taxpayers' money is spent without irregularities, and then report these findings to oversight bodies, while the Standing Committee on Auditor General play an oversight role. Talk to us about this. I have with me the Chairperson of the Standing Committee on Auditor General, Mr. Sakumzi Simeo. Sir, good afternoon and welcome to Parliament TV.
Thank you very much. I will appreciate that my surname is Somyo. It's good to be with you at your studios this afternoon, mainly because the Minister, Enoch Godongwana, will be in front of Parliament for the first time in his role as the Minister. We wish him all the best in tabling the MTBPS. The Auditor General's Office is a very important chain on the budget process. Not only on the process, even beyond such stage, because what the Minister will be tabling in terms of that budget statement is indicative of the financial standing of the entirety of the fiscus. And it is the Auditor General's role to follow the money. And when that office follows the money, it has to keep in mind what are the key prescripts which every department, every recipient of such part of the fiscus would have to observe with the upkeep of such legislations in the expenditure, in management, and prudently ensure that the national fiscus does serve the populace. As the Committee on Auditor General, we ensure all the time that when they do their own work as auditors right through the country in all spheres of government, inclusive of parastatals, they do so without any favor, without any prejudice, and they withstand their independence at all times.
And Mr. Smoyo, I'm glad that you mentioned that when they do their audits, you always ensure that they do it to their utmost best. However, there has been reports previously of where Auditor General officials were intimidated in some municipalities and in some departments when they were there to conduct their work. So what is your committee doing, or what is it planning to do to ensure that such does not happen and that these officials are enabled to conduct their work, so that when they come and report to you, then they come and report on factual evidence?
In the first instance, we have to appeal to South Africans generally that when such conduct does occur in the glare of any communities, they ought to report such occurrences to very closest of the law enforcement agencies, because that is so criminal. The Auditor General ought to pursue its own role without any fear. And such observation requires higher standard of observation from the part of those who are auditees. They ought to somewhat withstand the critical role of giving whatever the Auditor General requires in terms of their books, in terms of the invoices, and tracking even the performance of such municipalities taken through the length and breadth of such institutional frame and its own jurisdiction to observe where the expenditure has gone. From our part, we have had some interactions which were very fruitful with the top brass of the SAPS, who have worked hard to assign even individuals during the time of audit so that they remain alert on such instances. But we are so pleased in the current reporting times that there has been very minimal or even less of such incidents. So our interaction with the law enforcement agencies were very successful. We are so thankful that there's been such observance and the actual observation by the auditees to respect that the Office of the Auditor General, when conducting such audits, that they even to help them to ensure that they improve their standard of expenditure and they improve the management of such scarce resources for the benefit of the population who is within their own jurisdiction. So we would plead with them not to take them as actual policing. They are there to assist them to ensure that their books are up to standard.
And I'm wondering what impact could the Auditor General Amendment Act, which came into effect in 2029, have? Because that adds so to extend the mandate of the Auditor General to now refer matters of material findings and make recommendations to the relevant authorities. Could that be the reasons why they're experiencing these challenges? Because now they are able to refer and not just write a report and table to Parliament. And if so, is that office, the Auditor General's office, well capacitated to deal with those matters?
In the first instance, we must take note of the fact that the president of the country has been emphatic on the point of fighting crime and corruption. And secondly, to ensure that the state generally improves in the observation of ethical conduct. And such a firm statement flies closer to what the Office of the Auditor General would have to judge after such performance in as far as the audits are concerned. There might be some gross material findings which would require referrals. We have practically seen such when the Auditor General was asked to perform a real-time audit when the country had to put aside more than 500, closer to 500 billion rand to take care of the entire population during the high effects of COVID-19. That audit, when it was done, there were quick referrals to a number of agents who would have formed what was termed the Fusion Center. In the Fusion Center, you would find stakeholders which are inclusive of the law enforcement agents. So the Auditor General, after finalizing such audits, would have made some referrals to that center. And happily, there were some kind of instances where certain individuals or groupings apprehended who were found to have broken the law. That is an example which the Office of the Auditor General sought to set through that action. Even now, there is a report which contains plus even more than 90 auditees who were chosen by that office to conduct such in-depth audit in as far as such materiality which was identified at the time, were to receive that report in the near future, which is indicative that law, as revised, as amended, has been applied. You are correct in that any legal prescripts, through its own review, requires additional capacity to effect such reviewals. It has been the case with the Office of the Auditor General, wherein Treasury has made an undertaking to fund further such function. As a result, in the previous financial year, an amount of 50 million rand was allocated for such functions. And we're glad that was made, and the good use of it has been observed by the Office of the Auditor General. It is never enough, and that capacity will be built incrementally because as things improve, as elements of criminality improve, and therefore our systems must as well be overmatch those systems which are applied, but those who are hell-bent to break the law.
Now, what happens in instances where we know that we put remedial actions to say this needs to be attended, but there would be instances, or there are instances where these remedial actions are not implemented. What does Parliament do? As what role does then Parliament do? This is an act of Parliament. Now the agency has put up the remedial actions. The remedial actions are not being implemented, or in some instances even referred the matters to other relevant agencies, but there is no actions, or we do not see an implementation. What does then Parliament do, or what would then be the role of Parliament in that regard?
We're pleased to say in that instance, if you look into the parameters of functionality of that office, that there would be an interaction with the entirety of the institutional frame. And through that interaction, there would be an opportunity where the accounting officer of a particular auditee would be briefed on such instances where certain remedial action has been somewhat proposed. And therefore, there ought to be action taken by such an accounting officer. After that, there will be referral to the executive authority so that together, the executive authority and accounting authority of the institution would see it fit to stick to such remedial action as proposed, to find ways of putting good to follow what the Auditor General has somewhat proposed in the findings. You are correct. In some instances, would find it hard to accommodate those who have failed to implement such remedial actions. And therefore, the referral goes further to issue certifications so that those individuals who have failed to honor such a prescribed mode by the Auditor General would have had to follow some other apt level of observation. So the issuance of such certificates recognizes the failure of the accounting officer one way or the other. There has been no institution so far which has gone towards that route, because the Office of the Auditor General is of the view that such measures are mainly of a corrective nature, and the observation of such propositions ought to be followed through the actual performance of such departments or auditees. We are pleased to see an environment where there is a collaborative effort between the Office of the Auditor General and various departments and auditees to ensure that we don't arrive at that point.
I can say that some of those auditors have appeared before some of the committees that I sit in, and we have indeed observed that. This week started with Auditor General briefing various committees of parliaments on the audit outcomes of the departments and entities. What then will happen from these briefings? Because in many instances, we've seen where Auditor General would come to Parliament and say, this has been recurring for the past financial years, and we are still standing with this irregular and fruitless expenditure of 1.2 billion, and it has been carrying over the years. They've come to Parliament, they've presented their annual reports together with the reports of the Auditor General. What then for Parliament?
Yes, the first step is the Auditor General taking various portfolio committees of Parliament in terms of those briefings. After such briefings have been completed, each portfolio is free to call on the affected department to appear in front of it and be able to answer on the instances which are of a critical nature for the functionality of such a department. Because we can't be acting as if things are normal. The country loses a lot of money through recklessness and at times through fraudulent means. And breaking the law, because budget is the law. You see, so if you do less in terms of observation of such prescripts, so you are equal into breaking the law. So the department, which means the accounting officer, should take appropriate action against those who are found wanting in terms of ensuring that such resources are accounted for. If the accounting officer fails to do so, we've seen in the past a number of them who had to face the music because Parliament can't vote on a particular policy statement and budget and see it fizzling out in scrupulous ways, less observation in terms of the regulations or law. And the Treasury takes all the trouble to prescribe for department certain standards to follow. And if they fail to follow such standards, each portfolio committee ought to take the relevant department into order so that whatever it does should ensure that it is within the upkeep of the observable standards and regulations. So Parliament would take that route and be advised in a plenary form of the decisions which have been taken by each and every parliamentary committee after such interaction. Those who have had gross financial misconduct, they even get a second tougher hearing through SCOPA, where they are grilled perfectly on what has led to such mismanagement of such resources. And from that point, even the report would be tabled for Parliament to observe and take specific decisions for the referral to the authorities within such departments, executive authority or an accounting officer.
And what then happens with those entities or departments who have firstly not managed to table their annual reports and financial statements on time? I can just mention a few. The South African Post Office has not been able to submit its annual reports and financial statements, as well as the State Information Technology Agency, and they're looking at receiving those in the following year, early next year. What impact will that then have on the entity if up until now it has not been audited for reasons known to the AG and the entity, but up until now such entities have not been audited? What then is the impact on the South African citizens?
the impact is huge because in the first instance, that such affected departments would spend without any recourse in terms of the previous financial allocations. And that is not in order. You would know the current financial standing of the post office, which has got huge challenges in terms of its own financial upkeep, and the question of the late submissions in terms of both financials and the report is something which we worry about. But the parliamentary committee, which is a primary referral point when such failures arise, ought to take appropriate action on such failure. We must make people accountable. Those who are accounting officers must remain accountable for their own decisions or indecisions, and so that a firm statement is made, so that we set an example on what is required for the performance of such institutions.
And now we have entities that did not receive clean audits for a number of years that have been struggling. So, what is Parliament then planning? Parliament should be able to do something with this, because cannot have an entity that keeps on not doing well or unable to conduct its books, which I would also then say impacts on service delivery, because a qualified audit opinion paints a bleak picture about your service delivery areas. What do we intend to do about those entities and departments?
In the first instance, you look into the policy parameters of such departments, and based on such policy parameters, the portfolio committee concerned, through a call in the ministry, would indicate the basis of the failure to apply what they have promised in terms of the undertaking on their performance plan to do for the benefit of South Africans. If you go to the nature of the cluster of such institutions look into their own performance, you would find out that the bigger allocation in terms of resources would go towards the social cluster. And the social cluster is responsible for various interventions to ensure that society withstand the challenges which they face from time to time, like your social grants, etc. And if you get into the audit outcomes of such bigger allocations, you begin to worry. Though the direction goes to the beneficiaries concerned, it says a lot about the various departments who are in the receiving end in as far as such allocations are concerned. So from the audit side, we ensure that the quality of the audits that go towards such findings are qualitative, such that the detail could run through the test of time, and the relevance and the outlook of such findings could pass the muster. And if you do so, there will be less challenge on such, and be able to create pointers, even for Treasury, to begin to firm up their own outlook in as far as the standards are concerned. Those standards would come from the Office of the Accountant General, which ought not to blink an eye in terms of looking into the observation of such standards, because that's the office which ought to follow the implementation of their own standards at all times. So you'd have a parliament on the side, and you'd have a treasury on the other side in terms of the allocation, the finalization, and thirdly, the various prescripts which relate to how the Accountant General would insist the performance of each and every individual group or institution that receive finances from the national fiscus ought to behave. And through that behavior, then appropriate action ought to be taken by these various pointed institutions.
Right, so thank you very much. But lastly, in instances, I think I've asked this question earlier, but I just want to ask it again so that you can just get the message across to our viewers. So here it is, the Auditor General has made the remedial actions. These remedial actions are not implemented. Specifically, the role of Parliament, in particular, your committee. What does it do with that? Because AG has made remedial actions. People are not implementing the remedial actions of the AG. What does then your committee do or Parliament do to strengthen its oversight role?
In the first instance, our committee is the committee that relates and strengthens the hand and the arm of the Auditor General, which ensures that the Auditor General operates within the framework, the standards set by the Accountant General, and after which the outcomes are put on scale and they pass the requirement in terms of such set standard and the quality of such outcomes could pass any test. That's our responsibility. When we have somewhat affirmed that through the outcomes of the audits, the Auditor General goes to each and every parliamentary committee, which is fully briefed on the outcomes. That parliamentary committee, which is a committee responsible for the policy, its own upkeep, its own observation, accountability of such department, look into that frame and the financial resources allocated, whether they have been allocated appropriately in terms of their own spending, the outcome of expenditure, observation of the law within that expenditure, and the ministry is asked to account for such in that portfolio committee. Our committee follows that behavioral pattern, whether the reports of the Auditor General are somewhat given appropriate respect, followed by those who ought to follow them. Because you have paid for those audits, and paying for the audits, you must observe, follow the outcome, because the value is on the implementation of the propositions which are coming from such findings. And the failure to do so is reported to Parliament, both by such portfolio committee and ourselves in terms of the standing of the report of the Auditor General, its own independence and its own quality, which provides the frame for the entirety of the expense of the fiscus as allocated through the budget by the Minister of Finance. So the upkeep of such expenditure, the actual role of the Office of the Auditor General is to follow that money, and the multiplicity of committees which have to look into each and every department. Accounting officers, ministers must get to Parliament and account for such. And the heavier accountability would then be on a call by Ncop when there is a critical failure of such department to observe such prescripts. You would have observed during the week how some of the departments or entities have appeared in front of the Ncop, and how they are going to somewhat be ensured that they account on their failures on those matters.
Lastly, and very brief, Chairperson, if you can just pass a message to the chairpersons are responsible for the portfolio committees in relation to the work of the Auditor General. Just a short message.
My message is clear and short. Now you have received the reports. Ensure that your departments account on the basis of such reports, and holding them accountable. You are assisting the population of South Africa to receive the services and the development of the country to be advanced on the basis of your firmness to ensure that each and every entity, government department, remains accountable for what has been allocated to them to spend on a financial year. Your role is a critical role. Make the ministries accountable at all times.
Make the ministries accountable at all times. Chairperson, thank you very much for joining us here. It's greatly appreciated, and we take note of all the insights that you've shared with our viewers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
That was the Chairperson of the Standing Committee on Auditor General, which plays a critical role in the budget process. The MTBPS contains broadly the revised and proposed fiscal framework and outlines the spending priorities of government for the medium term. Matters dealing with the fiscal framework, macroeconomic and fiscal policy estimates are referred to the Committee on Finance. Matters dealing with the revised actual spending projections and adjusted grant allocations, proposed spending priorities, and proposed division of revenue are referred to the committees on appropriations. We have the chairperson on finance committees and the chairpersons on appropriations committees to talk to us further on this issue. MTBPS is part of the budget process of Parliament, which starts early with the start of the State of the Nation address. In fact, the whole budget process is a very complicated process, which has many moving parts. Take a look at this insert on the budget process and do stay tuned.
Following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better. Parliament TV, channel 408 on DSTV.
One of the most important oversight functions of Parliament. The budget reflects the choices that government has to make, and it is the tool it uses to achieve its economic and development goals. In the budget, government sets out what it's going to spend and the income it collects, which it needs to finance its expenditure. The government has to balance a wide range of legitimate demands with limited resources at its disposal. Budget oversight is intended to help government move forward to realize its goals by increasing government's accountability to its citizens. The budget process occurs over a period of about 18 months. The budget of any financial year undergoes a 4-stage process. The stages are drafting, planning, and formulation, the legislative process, implementation, as well as auditing and assessment. Parliament and government departments plan the budget for months in advance for the following year, implementing the current budget while continuously monitoring it for delivery and compliance with policy, and evaluating and auditing the previous year's budget. During the legislative phase of the budget, the National Assembly, the National Council of Provinces, and the provincial legislatures debate budget votes with the involvement of interest groups and civil society, the media, and the general public. This is to ensure that they reflect national priorities and accommodate outcomes and actions required by the midterm strategic framework. It is important to measure the effectiveness of public spending and the manner in which public resources are spent. The more immediate goals are to ensure that government budget priorities are consistent with the declared policy objectives and that the financial resources allocated to priority areas are spent fully and properly. However, a larger purpose of the budget process is to contribute to democracy through ensuring openness, transparency, and accountability for public resources. Parliament, following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better.
The year ahead must be a time for change, for progress, and also for rebirth. It must be a year in which we rise as a people and we do things that are going to make us rise. This is no ordinary year, and this is no ordinary State of the Nation address. I will therefore focus this evening on the foremost overriding priorities that we have for 2021. They are not many, but they are focused. First, we must defeat the coronavirus pandemic. That is primary in everything that we have to do as a nation. And second, we must accelerate our economic recovery. Third, we must implement economic reforms to create sustainable jobs and drive inclusive growth. And finally, and not leaving many other things aside, but these are the key ones. And finally, we must fight corruption and strengthen the state that has been weakened.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us, you are still watching Parliament TV on DSTV channel 408. We are still building up to the Minister's all-important medium-term budget policy statement, which he will be delivering this afternoon at 1400 hours. Now, South Africa uses a 3-year rolling budget system, which is informed by the key government priorities, strategic plans of the department, and the fiscal stance. The Constitution provides Parliament with the powers to amend the budget through the Money Bills and Amendment Procedures and Related Matters Act of 2009. With me in studio this afternoon, I have the Honorable Joseph Maswanganyi, who is the Chairperson of the Standing Committee on Finance in the National Assembly. And then we have joining us via Zoom platform, Mr. Edward Zoisile Njadu, who is the whip for the Select Committee on Finance in the Ncop. They will be talking to us about the budget process and what we can expect this afternoon. Chairperson in the studio, Mr. Maswanganyi, welcome and thank you so much for making the time to be with us. Wonderful. Mr. Njadu, Honorable Njadu, are you with us?
Yes, good afternoon.
Honorable Njadu?
Yes, I'm here. Good afternoon.
Honorable Njadu?
I'm here. Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Hello.
Can you hear us? Are you with us, Mr. Njadu?
Yes, I'm with you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Great to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Just by way of introducing this very important topic for discussion this afternoon, we know that the COVID-19 phenomenon is it's unprecedented and it has impacted not only the South African economy, it has impacted the global economy at large. Talk to us a little bit more, just as a starting point, Mr. Maswanganyi, about the mandate of the committee, the Standing Committee on Finance, particularly in dealing with this unprecedented phenomenon.
Thanks. We as the Standing Committee on Finance, our mandate is to look at the fiscal framework in regard to the finance of the Republic. Then you have the other finance committee, which is responsible for appropriations, chaired by Shenge. So we have got divisions in terms of responsibilities. We look at the budget as a whole after the minister will have presented it, analyze the fiscal framework, put together a report, and then submit it to the National Assembly for adoption. From there, it is handed over. The next part is taken over by appropriations, which deals with certain responsibilities. I think Shenge will talk to that. So I wanted to just make a distinction between SCOPA and SCOA. In relation to the question that you have asked on the impact of COVID on the budget, it has been very disastrous. It has caused serious adverse damage to the country, not only to the country, but globally. It has changed the global economy adversely. It has caused unemployment. You have seen how the unemployment rate has skyrocketed. And the most affected sector is the youth and women.
Absolutely.
Youth unemployment today in South Africa is very high. I think it's more than 74%. You can see so many young people are unemployed. And there's a category of graduates, youth graduates, who have gone to school. Their parents and the country have spent so much in skilling them. But in return, we can't utilize their skills. So it's a matter that has to be attended to.
Absolutely.
Poverty has gone up, and you can see that by the number of people who are queuing at the post office just for 350 Rand. It means a lot to them. It might not mean a lot to me because I use it for pouring petrol, but to them, it's a means of survival. We never had those kind of scenes before. Things were going well. Of course, the social grants were catering for 18 million. But now with the 350 Rand, if you are there at post office, it's very, very, very pathetic. Inequality has gone up tremendously. So COVID has caused serious challenges. It has mounted more problems that we had before. And the budget has to address all these challenges that I've mentioned before.
Indeed. Perhaps let's bring in Honorable Njadu into the conversation. Honorable Njadu, can you talk to us about the mandate of the Select Committee on Finance, particularly from an NCOP perspective? And we know that the issues that Honorable Masongane is talking to, issues of poverty and unemployment and inequality, these issues are issues that actually find expression at a localized, at a provincial, and of course at a localized level. Talk to us how, firstly, about the mandate of your committee and how you have approached some of these issues.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. From the National Council of Provinces. Good afternoon also to the Chairperson of the National Assembly, Mr. Maswangana. And the National Council of Provinces mandate, as we are representing the provinces, is that after the minister have tabled the medium-term budget policy statement today, we will then further engage with the minister, and then we will also further engage with public hearings, and also we will further engage with the provinces, whereby we will be getting the negotiating mandates from provinces, and also to have the final mandates from provinces. So in terms of the National Council of Provinces, in terms of the finance and appropriations, we are representing all the provinces, and also to deal with the issues of funding or to municipalities in terms of the appropriations. So I think in terms of the National Council of Provinces, that is in terms of the mandate from the National Council of Provinces.
Indeed. So when we think about what the policy focus should be in the next 3 years and the importance of the medium-term budget policy statement that the minister will be delivering this afternoon, can you share with us, Mr. Masongane, what are your thoughts in relation to what would the key priorities be that we can expect will be announced by the minister this afternoon, and also just in relation to, we are of course talking about a fluid COVID-19 impact on the economy, and we need to obviously hear what are the long-term interventions. So what are the key policy priorities that we can expect to come out of the minister's speech this afternoon?
The minister should be alive to issues that affect people on the ground. We have just come back from a very difficult process of local government elections. Service delivery is not up to standard. People all over are crying about water, whether you go to Nelson Mandela Bay, you go to Guyana. And what is surprising, lots of money has been spent there in Guyana, Nelson Mandela, but there's no water coming out of the pipes. And I'm just giving a typical example of the two towns. And the problem is all over. So the budget must speak to issues of water. Eskom is facing very serious problems. It's darkness all over. It's seriously affecting production. You can't build the economy when you have got an entity which is ever switching off the electricity. And we as members of parliament, we don't get to understand what is the problem. We deal with finance here. I think Shanga will deal with appropriations, that is his responsibility. But they don't deliver what people expect. And they do this when students are writing exams. What about parents who can afford to buy a candle, who can afford to buy a paraffin as an alternative source of lighting for their child to study overnight? That cannot be right. So the issue of SOEs have to be seriously addressed because it's a building block of a developmental state.
Key building block.
Yes.
Absolutely. But talk to us a little bit about state capacity, because even when the National Planning Commission released a diagnostic report, one of the key findings was that government or the state lacks the capacity or sufficient capacity to implement policy. So in as much as the Minister of Finance will be making these announcements that speak to issues on the ground, that is responsive from a budgetary perspective, how then, how does your committee deal with issues of state capacity, and how do you zone into that? Because ultimately that is the issue, because the minister can only do so much in terms of putting the budget in place and allocating that money towards issues that are critical, to keep the country afloat and to keep the country going. But talk to us about state capacity, because you're talking about they must deliver. But is there a handle or a finger on the pulse in relation to, do they have the capacity to actually deliver?
They have to. Departments have got a responsibility to deliver on their mandate. SOEs, the same should apply, but it's reverse. Instead, SOEs now are in serious trouble. It's not only Eskom, whether it's in the railway sector, in the port sector, and other sectors. All countries that are powerful today, be it Germany, be it China, be it Russia, they are so powerful because they've got very powerful state entities. Even if you are in Singapore and anywhere, their state entities are very powerful. And as I've said before, that serves as a very strong foundation for building a developmental state. You can't build a developmental state if you don't have capacity in terms of your SOEs. You can't rely on the private sector. As we speak, the economy of this country, 70% of it is controlled by the private sector. But what's happening? They hoard the money. They are not releasing the money for investment. But if you had a very strong state, like you have a China, for instance, as a case study, you are able to release the resources for investment, which in return, you have more revenue, you have more jobs, you deal with poverty, you deal with unemployment. So this budget should go a long way in trying to build very strong departments. Departments must account for what they're doing. They can have a situation where they don't spend the money. You allocate MIG to municipalities, but there's nothing spent at the end of the day. Or if they spend, the quality of what we see, like we saw in Gijima, they built a stadium which is a size of 1.5 meter high. It's embarrassing. We can't allow such things. It's a hard-earned money from the public because revenue comes from the people Then the next thing you see, mediocre kind of delivery of services. I think this time heads must roll where there has to be, because if there's no consequence management, that's where the problem is. A day before yesterday, we had a report from the Auditor General, and the Auditor General raises very critical issues that departments don't have audit action plans, no consequent management. They outline the challenges in the land bank, which is a very critical institution. Year after year, they raise all these issues. My colleague who was here before, Comrade Somio, spoke about the issues of Auditor General. But this time, there has to be consequence management, because people do as they wish, knowing that nothing will be done to them. It will be a story for a week, and from there, it will just disappear. There must be consequence management, and we must attend to the issues that people have been raising in the past weeks when we've been crisscrossing the country: unemployment, poverty, inequality, and the issue of SOEs. If we are able to attend to all those issues, that's where the budget will be making an impact. We don't want to be like, we're not academics. We sit here and theorize what the budget should do, but the budget must attend to simple issues that people have been raising. Absolutely. And the services that are delivered must be quality service. We can't build a road today. After a few months, the road is just eroded. It's just a donga. You can't pass through that road, as we have seen in most of the roads out there in provinces and municipalities.
Indeed, and one of the key principles of a developmental state, and you spoke about the private sector hoarding money. It is about state interventions, very strong state intervention to ensure that policy becomes an instrument that can drive the kind of transformation. If we're talking about this concept of developmental state, to give perfect and more better expression to the concept of a developmental state. But Mr. Njadu, let's quickly bring you in there. We've just come out of the local government elections a few days ago, and the issue of service delivery, as we know, is quite a major issue at local government level. And Honorable Masongane has also spoken to the issue of service delivery at local government level, and how people have lamented the fact that there's simply no service delivery, or even the amount of money that goes to local government, huge amounts of money that goes to local government, but we don't actually see value or for the money that is being allocated to local government in particular. Now, talk to us about the role of the NCOP when it comes to capacity building, oversight. We know that the Constitution makes provision that provinces must also play a capacitating role to local government. What kind of interventions is the NCOP putting in place to ensure that capacity at local government is being strengthened, and also punitive measures? Let's talk about what kind of measures. Mr. Masongane also talked about consequence management, so that, because that is probably one of the weakest spheres in relation to delivering on key issues that they've committed to. Talk to us about that, please.
Thank you very much. I think let me first say that the National Council of Provinces, in terms of its mandate, and is to hold the executive accountable, and also to make sure that we play a very effective and efficient role in terms of oversight to provinces, and also in terms of oversight to municipalities. I think out of the local government assessment, what came from the communities is that it was clear painted in terms of there's a lack of service delivery. Funds are being allocated, monies are not being spent. So it's very clear that in terms of the spending pattern for provinces and also the spending pattern for municipalities are very, very important. That going forward is to make sure that service delivery becomes a priority, and also provinces to support municipalities to make sure that capacity building is proper at the municipal level. So to make sure that mayors, municipal managers, and councillors are kept accountable for service delivery to the community, so that the issues that came from the communities in terms of water and sanitation, refuse removal, roads, sports stadiums, those services to be rendered to our communities. So the National Council of Provinces, its role is to have time to time, we call it taking parliament to the people, where that the National Council of Provinces is going out to a particular province, and where that we pick up all the measures and matters from that community, and then that we then make a report, and then to look at how the different departments and the municipalities are responding on those matters that the National Council of Provinces is going to pick up at the taking parliament to the people. So in terms of our role as the National Council of Provinces is to make sure going forward, service delivery will be the priority and the highest priority, and to make sure that those matters that came from the communities, those matters are going to be addressed with immediate effect.
Thank you very much, Mr. Njadu. I think I would like to ask Mr. Maswanganyi to just in few seconds, your closing remarks or your parting shot in relation to budget oversight. What can we expect from your committee in relation to making sure that the commitments that are being made, this 3-year cycle, that it delivers?
We'll make sure that we live up to our mandate as members of parliament to make sure that in particular Treasury, which is our core responsibility, and it has got so many critical entities like PIC, which is not spending money. The past 3 years, PIC has never invested. Instead, there are many young people out there, there are many women out there who come up with plans to start up businesses, and they are not assisted. So we'll make sure that entities that are under Treasury, be it DBSA, Land Bank, PIC, which are very powerful state organs, do assist in particular people in rural areas, the young people and the youth, and then the women. These are the critical areas that our main focus will be, so that we are not just all over, and make sure that they deliver as per their mandate.
As per their mandate. Honorable Njadu, your parting words?
Yes, thank you very much. From the National Council of Provinces, we would want to see what coming out from the medium budget policy statement is a greater economic growth, to invest in the economy, job creation, government to step up to procurement, fight corruption, reduce debt to the GDP, and also to have a better management of the budget will be appreciated. So the income and the expenditure, so that be balanced. So to avoid the overspending and also the underspendings. So from the National Council of Provinces, that is what we would want to our expectation from the medium-term budget. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Njadu. And I'd like to thank both my guests for making the time to be with us this afternoon. We know, Honorable Maswanganyi, you've got to rush over to the other side to go and attend this all-important speech delivery by the minister. But I want to thank you both for making the time to be with us this afternoon. We are still building up to the minister's medium-term budget policy statement, which will be taking place at 1400 hours this afternoon, and we are minutes away from it. Do stay tuned.
Thank you.
Following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better. Parliament TV, channel 408 on DST.
In terms of the Constitution, government is accountable to Parliament. Parliament, as the representative of the people, monitors and seeks to influence government policy and action through the budget. The budget is the instrument for translating policies and plans into public goods and services. Any policy or plan without a budget attached to it is unlikely to be successfully implemented. Economic success depends on the ability of government to employ limited resources with maximum effect. The role of Parliament in this regard cannot be overstated. Parliament's duty is to detect and prevent abuse, prevent illegal and unconstitutional budgetary conduct on the part of the government, make government budgetary operations more transparent, and hold the government answerable on how taxpayers' money is spent. Parliament exercises its oversight through various portfolio committees that assess the budget and other plans, as well as the performance of each department, including their financial performance, and hold them accountable. The budget process is crucial to good governance because it ensures that government expenditure remains aligned to South Africa's policy goals and objectives. What is also of great importance is that ongoing monitoring and tracking of the executive by Parliament allows for intervention in the event of wrongful expenditure and failures in service delivery. The process holds government departments accountable for their expenditure and gives Parliament and the citizens it represents an opportunity to make their own demands and interventions. Parliament, following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better.
Following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better.
The fiscal framework we tabled today entails the following. The main budget revenue is projected to be 1.35 trillion rand, or 25.3% as a share of gross domestic product in 2021. This rises to 1.52 trillion rand in the outer year being 2023-24 of the medium-term expenditure framework. When we were writing these numbers, Mr. President, 1.52 trillion, I was tempted to ask one member of the House how many zeros are in a trillion, but I thought not to do that. At the same time, non-interest spending will remain steady at approximately 1.56 trillion rand over the next 3 years, but will decline as a share of GDP from 29.2% in 2021-22 to 26.2% of GDP in 23-24. I requested tips from the public to help in crafting this budget. Many tips spoke about the limits to increased taxation. Others spoke about the need to cut the number of cabinet ministers, and I told them that was above my pay cut, above my pay level. That's not mine. We agree that tax increases must be kept to a minimum. And therefore, General Approval, there's no need for a tax report. We have chosen not to introduce the 40 billion rand in tax measures initially proposed in the October medium-term budget policy statement. I'll explain why later. With this framework, we provide the budget for South Africa's vaccination campaign. This campaign allows us to emerge from the restrictions that we have experienced to economic activity. So the restrictions were meant to help us fight against COVID. And now, as we gradually fight this, introducing vaccines, we should be able to return in time to full economic activity. We are allocating more than 10 billion rand for the purchase and delivery of vaccines over the next 2 years. But we do not stop there. We are increasing the contingency reserve from 5 billion to 12 billion to make provision for any further purchases of vaccines and to cater for any other emergencies. With this framework, We are on track to achieve our goal of closing the main budget primary deficits. We shall achieve a primary surplus on the main budget in 2024-25. This will be an important achievement and will coincide with the end of this sixth parliament. Most importantly, we will stabilize government debt at 88.9% of GDP in 2025-26, and the ratio will decline further thereafter. This is a significant commitment and improvement to the framework as compared to what we presented in October last year, and creates a sound platform for sustainable growth.
Following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better. Following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better. Parliament TV, channel 408 on DSTV.
Welcome back. You are still watching the live broadcast of Parliament TV on DSTV channel 408. This is a build-up to the medium-term budget policy statement, a maiden speech that will be delivered by the Minister of Finance, Mr. Enoch Godongwana. The Standing Committee on Appropriations was established in terms of the Money Bills Amendment Procedure and Related Matters Act, number 9 of 2009, often referred to as the Money Bills Act. In terms of Section 4.3 of the Money Bills Act, each House must establish a Committee on Appropriations, whose powers and functions include considering and reporting on the following matters: spending issues, amendments to the Division of Revenue Bill, the Appropriation Bill, Supplementary Appropriation Bill, and the Adjusted Appropriation Bill, the recommendations of the Financial and Fiscal Commission, including those referred to in the Intergovernmental Fiscal Relations Act 1997, Act number 97 of 1997, reports on actual expenditure published by the National Treasury and often known as Section 32 reports, and any other related matters. And with me, I have the Chairperson of the Standing Committee on Appropriations, Mr. Sifiso Buthelezi. Good afternoon, Mr. Buthelezi, and welcome to Parliament TV.
Good afternoon, sir, and good afternoon to the viewers of this very important parliamentary channel, because it educates the people about what happens here in Parliament.
That's so great to hear, Mr. Buthelezi. You would know that the country is currently on a national state of disaster level 1, and that has been, we've been on this state since March last year. So if you can briefly share with our viewers at home on how has COVID-19 pandemic impacted on the budget priorities of the country?
I think the most important thing around the pandemic is that we know that it affected our economy very negatively. We had one of the lowest economic growth, negative economic growth, which touched as 7% at some stage. That's a very big decrease. So with that come a lot of other hardships. One of those is that as government, the receiver of revenue, SARS, receives less money. So less money becomes available for government to use. But it doesn't end there. As you know, that we had a lot of lockdowns, people not going to work. As you know, that a lot of companies have closed. Certain sectors of the economy were not operational. For instance, tourism, because it just didn't depend on South Africa. It also depended on what was happening on other countries. So generally, if you like, it has been next to a catastrophic proportions when it comes to the impact, because all those things at the end of the day, they impact on the quality of lives, the impact on the jobs, as you know that we've hit the highest rates of unemployment, as it were, the impact on poverty, the impact on equality and inequality. So it has been. So government needed to be a little bit agile to respond to those things. Allocations with special appropriations bills which were coming. If you remember, last year we had more or less 2 budgets, one after the other, because the minister had to come back after the advent of COVID, and the numbers were just not adding up. So he had to come back with another budget, responding now to these challenges that I was spoken about. For instance, you know that before, we never had a budget to deal with vaccines, right? Now, he had to adjust to that, and then we deal with vaccines. A lot of workers were needed. Remember that we ended up employing more health workers, again, which was not budgeted for at the beginning of 2020. There were new facilities which had to be built, so a lot of budget going to health. But the social development, again, budget, right? As I said, that people were not working. Now we're to come with a lot of other interventions to provide what we refer to as safety nets for the most vulnerable people who are no longer having jobs. That's where the SRD grant, which is a temporary grant that had to come in, the 350 grant, which has become very popular because it just shows the level of difficulties of our communities. So that's how we had to respond as government. So it's the adjustment, trying to push budgets from certain areas which are important, but which were not a priority at certain stage. But again, try to get more money to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic impact on the lives of people. Because that's at the end of the day, I always say that the economics which doesn't relate to the lives of people, the economics which doesn't seek to improve the lives of our people is not worth the paper is written on. So the government has been quite agile and very much responsive in dealing with those challenges.
We appreciate the responsiveness of government in dealing with those challenges. So how has your committee ensured that the proposed budget reflects the need, the socio and economic needs of ordinary South Africans, in particular the poor and the vulnerable?
Yeah, I've touched on that. I touched on the grants. The DSD budget, social development, and its entities, SASSA, grew phenomenally. So we're responding to that. We recommended it to Parliament after the ministers presented to Parliament, and the National Assembly and Ncop approved that, and it became law. The new budget, but also. Which is very important. We can't be on the perpetual budget mode. I mean, grant mode, right? We can't be on that. The grants should be a temporary relief. At the end of the day, South Africans want to earn their money. They want to earn their livelihood. So we need to be an economy which produces and produces jobs. That's the main thing. But the economy which will do that is an economy which is growing. So as a response, again, you remember that the president, I think on the 15th of October, 2020, presented what we call economic reconstruction and recovery plan. At the heart of that is the realization that we need to grow the economy and grow that economy inclusively, meaning that everybody should participate. South Africans, especially those who are victims of apartheid, they want to be part of this economy. They don't want to be spectators and be on the margins and clap hands that other men and women are busy on. They wanted to be part of the reconstruction of this economy. So the president said at that time that there's a proverbial silver lining at that cloud, that as we reconstruct the economy, let's try and make sure that we include everybody into that economy. That's why we speak about localization, for instance, that let's start localizing so that we shouldn't just be importing everything and anything. Let's produce other things here in our country.
which is something that the president spoke strongly on when he was delivering his State of the Nation at the beginning of this year.
Yeah.
So having said that, what would then be the key, like the policy priorities for this 2021 proposed appropriations bill? What are the key policy priorities for 2021?
The key one, in fact, is one that I'm coming from. We would like to hear the minister as the ANC caucus saying very strongly, how do we deal with this economic recovery? What is there in the budget? As the government, we have identified the infrastructure spending. So I expect to see him to say, we've put so much for infrastructure for the MTF, so that we are able to deal with both social and economic infrastructure. That's one. But another very important, remember that government infrastructure spending, for instance, is roads, right? I like saying that government infrastructure spending is the necessary input for private sector, right? Because private sector then it also gets encouraged that we've got good roads, therefore we can invest, we can do the pushing to move our goods from point A to point B. So infrastructure spending is very important. It's not just about the product that it produces, but it becomes an input for both business and for the society to be able to carry on with our day-to-day activities. So it's one of the things that we knowing that the new minister, who we were congratulating as the African National Congress in Parliament, the new finance minister is the head of the ETC, Economic Transformation Committee of the African National Congress. So these matters are not matters which are new to him, because whichever minister comes in must come and implement the policy that the governing party has agreed on, and then allowing other parties to participate in Parliament.
Well, because we're running out of time, but I'm going to ask you two questions which I would like you to sum up. One being the key recommendations that came from the Financial Fiscal Commission in relation to this proposed budget. And secondly, the role that has been played by the society, the public, in terms of public, but what role have they played, or what inputs did they make, and what are we looking at doing with those inputs that have made into this? Did
you say the FFC?
FFC,
yes. I think one of the things which keep on coming, both the FFC and the PBO, Parliamentary Budget Office, that have been, it's about the effective and efficient usage of resources, right? It's one thing to approve the resources, to approve the budget. It's something else to ensure that those resources end up doing what they are supposed to do, not just doing that anyhow, but effective and efficiently. I think that has been coming up to say that the checks and balances are very important. They've been putting that up front, and we agree wholeheartedly with them. We're in sync with them that it's very important that with these limited resources that we're having, let's make sure that they are efficient and effectively used to deal with the trilemma of poverty, of unemployment, of inequality, broadly speaking. So I think I think that one is very important. Others can follow on that. So I think that will be the thrust of my response to you. And as the committee, as the committee again will be from our side playing our role, ensuring that happens. But again, as you know, that we're the budgets for all the departments, they're all other portfolio committees who are responsible for different departments and SOEs. I think what we have also said that we need to try to work together and not move away from side. We've started doing that, but I don't think that we're at an optimal level.
And lastly, having looked at the bulk of budget being spent already by the departments over the last few months, are you able to say where mostly was this budget spent on, taking into consideration, of course, what you indicated earlier with having two budgets, having the Minister of Finance coming back to take the vaccine budget, but the bulk of the budget of the departmental expenditure thus far, would you say you are certified that it's spent where it's been allocated to?
Yes, it has been spent on social development. Many people got into the grant basket, which was very important for us to provide that safety net and make sure that people have got something to eat. So the social development has received also health, to make sure that we deal with the vaccines, and again, the employment of more nurses and other health workers to deal with the pandemic. But again, to ensure that our kids are able to go to school and they learn, our budget has also gone there, right? So basically, that's where you'll see that the bulk of our budget has gone.
Mr. Buthelezi, I must thank you very much for taking time out your busy schedule to come and talk to us here at Parliament TV. To those who have just joined us, we have been talking to Mr. Sifiso Buthelezi, the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Appropriations, a committee of the National Assembly, sharing his insights on what is before Parliament today, the medium-term budget policy statement. Please stay tuned.
Following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better. Parliament TV, channel 408 on DSTV. Following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better.
The South African Constitution will give certain powers to legislatures, Parliament in particular, to say there's a role of Parliament in terms of the budget process. Parliament has a specific role to play in terms of oversight over public finances in South Africa, and the Constitution prescribes for Parliament to have specific legislation which guides how Parliament process the budget as presented by the Minister of Finance in February and in midterm budget in October. So that legislation, which was prescribed in terms of the Constitution, is called Money Bills and Related Matters Act, which was passed in 2009 to say these are the processes which you follow as Parliament in oversight over public finances or in processing the budget as we know them. And that act does recognize that members of Parliament are not supposed, are not necessarily voted in as technical specialists in finance, economics, and policy spaces. And then as a result, they established the office called Parliamentary Budget Office as a unit which is supposed to advise Parliament on the process, on the money bills themselves, on the budget process. What are the issues you need to consider by doing analysis, research, and brief the committees in terms of what some of the matters that didn't take into account, or some of the issues just around society in relation to service delivery. So we are that office which is established as a direct technical and advisory to Parliament on finance and economic and policy spaces in relation to the budget process. So we certainly, in a way, what happens is that when the Minister of Finance presents the budget, the Finance and Appropriations Committee invite us to brief them about these budgets, what are the issues, what they need to take into account, and so on, and together with other entities and before the public hearing. So that's come in, we can know, you need to see this, and this what it means, and all of that, and then they take the process forward. So that's what we do.
Following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better. Following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better. Parliament TV, channel 408 on DSTV.
Good afternoon. You're still watching Parliament TV on DSTV channel 408 at our parliamentary studios in Cape Town. The Minister of Finance will later today at 1400 hours, in fact, in a few minutes, deliver the medium-term budget policy statement, which is popularly known by the acronym MTBPS. This address will be delivered at a hybrid sitting of the National Assembly at 1400 hours. Now remember to join the conversation on hashtag MTBPS 2021 on all our social media platforms. The budget process often comes across as quite a complicated one. However, it is crucial for good governance, particularly because the budget process ensures that government expenditure remains aligned to South Africa's policy goals and strategic objectives. What is also of great importance for us to remember is the ongoing monitoring and tracking by the executive and Parliament, particularly Parliament's role, which allows the appropriate interventions to be undertaken in the event of policy implementation failures as well as service delivery failures. This process holds government departments accountable for their expenditure, and it gives Parliament, as well as the citizens of the country, an opportunity to make sure that their demands are considered in the budget to ensure that the budget becomes more responsive to the needs of the people that Parliament serves. Now, before we get to the minister's speech a little bit in a few minutes, as a matter of fact, I am now joined in studio, of course, by the Director of the Parliamentary Budget Office, Dr. Dumisani Jantjies, who is actually has been with us before and normally provides great insights about how to unpack the budget. Dr. Jantjies, thank you so much for making the time to be with us this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Suda. Thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful. I think just to start the conversation, talk to us for the benefit, obviously, of our viewers as well, about the mandate of the Parliamentary Budget Office, and particularly in the current COVID-19 related context.
Thank you for the opportunity for us to talk about Budget Office with your audience. Parliamentary Budget Office really is an entity of Parliament that belongs to South Africa, which was established by Act of Parliament to support members of Parliament in the role of fiscal oversight over time. And I think what we have done what we do in a very layman's terms is really take the medium-term budget statement as it proposed, and we identify key issues for members of Parliament to take them on before they approve. In particular, would like to say, look, how does the policy proposals likely to influence economic development, how they are likely to influence the service delivery, and how they like to ensure we realize our fiscal objectives within the public finances. That's in a sense what we do.
Talk to us quickly about, obviously we know the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted people's livelihoods. Many people have lost jobs. Poverty and unemployment, the gap between the poor and the rich is getting wider and wider. Talk to us about what kind of social relief measures we can expect. And we also know that there is this basic income grant, which has been mooted as a possible solution to address these issues. Talk to us about that.
Actually, there's a global debate that has taken place over time. You're correct that there has been a lot of impact in households globally, but here at home as well, you see a lot of loss of jobs, acceleration of poverty and so on. And I think what we have done as a budget office, we've looked at prepare the pre-MTBPS brief for the committees where they look at, we show them the status of the economy and society and also poverty levels and so on. Coming back to the discussion that has taken place globally, that government has to do more to support the poor. And we've seen also in South Africa, government went on to introduce temporary measures to support the low-income households. One of the bigger discussions is actually long time discussions around the basic income grant, which started way in the early 2000s South African context. And there has been proposals that there is a need for realization of government need to support low-income households to ease poverty and inequality in that regard. And we have also entered into this discussion as well as a budget office from the request of the committees to say, look at what are some of the likely benefits and these challenges around that. And what we have shown that actually over the years, the support, social grant support is by far the most important intervention by government that is able to alleviate poverty within community, society. Which has so many grants, there has been shown evidence that it does actually impact quite quickly in poverty. The discussion around the basic income grants, we have looked at in a different way. We say, look, the question that we must ask ourselves as society in South Africa is, can we afford not to have basic income grant in South Africa? When you look at the implications for poverty in leading to more instability, political instability, it affects the economies as well. When you look at the events that happened in July, really, there is a lot of instability. But I think the question around basic income grants in my view, is that there hasn't been really a lot of discussion around the economics of it.
Absolutely.
You know, how does that, if we're gonna decide to, pursue the policy of social income, basic income grant, what does it mean for poverty? What does it mean for the communities who are, so much struggling? But also, it means there will be more demand economy. More goods will be demanded by low-income households. Basic goods will be demanded, which in a way could have a spin-off in our economy over the time that is. I mean, when you look at the upper bound of poverty, if you allow whatever, say, 100 billion in the economy, that could actually have a lot of spin-off for
because the money goes back to the economy, into the economy again.
Which is likely to also chances of increasing government revenue, but also dealing with some of the human rights issue. By the way, dealing with poverty is a human rights issue, which we have signed for South Africa in the multilateral conventions, but also the Constitution doesn't. It does denounce poverty and hunger. Even the National Development Plan, it does actually, government has committed to address poverty in a way.
Now, how do we balance, how do we ensure, and let's talk about the role of your office as well, the kind of support that the advice that you give, not only to the finance committees, the finance and the appropriations committees, but how do we strike a balance between social relief, and of course we know there needs to be poverty alleviation measures that are put in place to cushion the poor, those who cannot help themselves at the moment, and economic recovery.
Yep.
And we know the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has been had quite a devastating impact on the economy. Now, how do you then make sure that in terms of how you frame the advice that you give to these key committees, that there is a good balance that is struck between the two, so that we don't just give money for social relief, but we don't actually focus on how do we bring people out of that state of dependence on the state to actually be able to get into jobs that they can work for themselves and provide for their families. Because as we must be, truthful, 350 is not a lot of money. You can't really build a family with that. And let's talk about, is it just in the long term, and also in relation to this 3-year cycle, what can we then expect in relation to your sustained advice and guidance and ensuring that there is a balance?
I think what we have looked at, this should be seen as complementary, support for social support, but also the economic recovery. I think what we've shown over time, even our analysis recently in the pre-MTBPS analysis, we emphasize the importance of a long-term plan of structural economic transformation, where we look at the need to really move a lot towards productive support for productive sector in the economy, whereby the policy, macroeconomic policy, fiscal policy really is geared towards, over the long term, support the more of productive sectors, particular manufacturing. Because when you look at manufacturing, there's a key linkage to the entire value chain. We look at how it affects the primary sector and how we affect also the advanced services in that regard. So that's very important. And equally, once you try to do that, you are ensuring jobs are created and people are able to come into the mainstream and participate into the wider economy. And equally, for me to look for work, I need to bath, I need to have, and that's when the social support comes in, enables me until I get the work employment opportunity, I'm still able to get data, I'm able to bath and go to the market to look for work and so on. But also looking at some of the support for small and medium entities within that structural economic transformation, it becomes very important in that regard. So that's how we balance it out, to say they are complementary, it should not be seen as separate policy intervention.
Absolutely. So when we're talking about the structural constraints in the economy and the structural features of poverty, particularly we think about issues such as, the spatial environment where many people, the poor, find themselves in areas where they're not in CBDs, they're not in close proximity to where opportunities are. Talk to us about structural reforms and how the budget can be structured, how the fiscal instruments and macroeconomic policy can be used to ensure that we begin to actively address those issues in a manner that we are able to see monetary results, number one. The second aspect that is linked to that is the issue of state capacity, because we can budget as much as we want to. We may have the resources, but without the necessary capacity, it becomes difficult.
Yeah, I mean, there's two structural reforms here. There's one structural reform which government, has been pursuing for a time, structural economic reform, which is about ensuring that there is the easy way of doing business, and also there is, certain sectors are supported in the process. It's what we've done. We've done analysis around that as well to say to members of parliament, that structural reform that's been discussed a lot, it focuses a lot around the supply side of the economy. And there's a need to realize that there also a need to be much thinking about some of the other demand side of it, which ensures that we have a good balance there. Issues around, having reach on widely, we have done a review around the district development model from the local government, where we say it's a policy that has been pursued by government on a pilot basis. But what we've seen in our analysis is that there's certainly a need to really ensure that there's a clear coordinations between the three spheres. When you look at some of the government sectors that are seen reduction in budgets, are quite critical in ensuring that model actually functions. But the key aspects, the decline in revenue in local government, which in a way, wherever they are, it becomes a bit of a problem to implement or to get people from different areas to be involved in the mainstream economy. So it's very important that the budget, discussion of the budget, also take those into account over the medium term. I know that government has been working on looking at how the support to local government is improved to ensure that the model is able to be implemented.
Absolutely.
And it is the objective thereof.
Indeed. Views at Home, we are still building up to the minister's all-important medium-term budget policy statement, and we are literally minutes away from this important speech. But before we get there, as we see that members are actually making their way, in fact, most of them are seated already in the National Assembly chamber, and because of COVID-19 regulations, some of them are actually they are in other venues, such as the E249, which has also been, they've made changes in there. They've made the necessary infrastructure upgrades to ensure that members are able to then also be part of the conversation in the National Assembly while they are in E249. So we are now crossing over live to the minister's medium-term budget policy statement, which he will be delivering live.
Please be seated. Honorable members, before we proceed with today's business, I wish to announce that the vacancy which occurred in the National Assembly due to the passing of Mr. C. Mackenzie has been filled by the nomination of Dr. V.N. Khumalo with effect from the 9th of September 2020.